In March, COVID-19 precipitated a seismic shift to people's working lifestyles. The question of what the future of work will look like has become top of the agenda. On this panel, moderated by Caroline Ceniza-Levine, co-founder of Six Figure Start, we have joining her Elise James-DeCruise, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Marcus Thomas. I feel like I'm on the Oscars and the music starts playing and I have to speak fast. Carol Mahoney, Chief People Officer. Trisch L. Smith, Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. And Joshua Encarnacion, an Executive Coach. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. I'm going to hand it over to you, Caroline.
Yeah, so this is such an exciting panel. I'm excited to be moderating this and hearing from each and every one of you. Just to introduce myself, my name is Caroline Ceniza-Levine. I'm a senior contributor to Forbes Leadership, which is how I got myself on this panel. I'm about all things career. So I coach people, I write about careers, I'm on the media about careers. And I do think this is such an important topic. So I'd love to hear more about just each and every one of you in terms of your companies, your roles. So why don't we start with Carol?
Hi there. I'm Carol Mahoney, and I'm the Chief People Officer at Gainsight. And it's an awesome job. My background has been in and out of recruiting, compensation, all aspects of what we call teammate success. And here at Gainsight, it's just the culmination of a career. It's a really awesome opportunity. We're in the middle of rethinking how we do work, where we do work, who works with us, and in what capacities. So it's a really exciting time to be at Gainsight. And I'm really pleased to be here.
Thanks so much, Carol. Elise?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Elise James-DeCruise, Chief People and Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Marcus Thomas. I'm really excited to be here today. In my role, I help to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within the workforce, workplace, and marketplace. Work really closely across leadership team as well as the workforce to create a more inclusive environment for our employees. My background is in education, program development, diversity and inclusion, and creating safe and brave spaces for employees and the broader ecosystem to be more bold and courageous as we advance DE&I.
Great. Thanks so much, Elise. Trish?
If I could successfully get myself off of mute. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a delight to be with you today. So I serve as Edelman's Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Edelman is a global communications PR firm with about 63 offices around the world. And I come from a non-traditional background in that I was an agency person. I've done public relations, communications, reputation management my entire career, and really worked to, talk myself into a job in that I kept saying what we should be doing. And they said, well, you do it. And so I wanted to create more places and spaces for people like myself within our firm and within our industry, and to help to transform our company to better serve our clients by bringing more diversity to the table. So I helped to develop our global strategy to oversee and implement all of our education as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion, our partnerships, our recruitment efforts, our leadership development, and so on. And so excited to be here with you all today.
Great. Thanks so much. And Josh.
How's it going, everyone? Joshua Encarnacion, serving as an executive coach, independent consultant at different firms throughout the tech industry, just really honing in on learning and development and a lot of organizational strategy. Most recently served as Chief Executive Officer for Alco Inc., a company that focused on providing job-seeking software engineers with emotional intelligence and the computer science fundamentals they need to navigate the job search process, and also just upskill in their careers in general. I don't know if you all know, but there's a lot of people problems in the engineering space. And so that's kind of where I fixated my career. I actually was trained as a technical recruiter at Google, built workforce transition programs for Uber, and now supporting leaders at scale. So excited to be on this panel and looking forward to learning from everyone.
Great. So I'd love to start with, I feel like what is the elephant in the room when it comes to the workplace trend of this year, work from home, right? So let's talk about work from home, just in terms of, it's becoming the new normal. I mean, I think there was a lot more work remotely, but do you think that this is going to continue? Do you think that companies are going to use this as a selling proposition, and are companies ready to make that shift? So I'd love to hear from each of you your ideas. And Josh, let's start with you since you went last the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think work from home isn't going anywhere, especially in the tech industry, right? And as software continues to take over the world, I feel every industry will have its opportunity to be fully remote, or if not, take on this hybrid approach to contributing, to being productive, to connecting. I think the challenge is going to remain, how do we make sure that we're not leaving out different portions of the world when it comes to contributing digitally? Because what is a privilege to us is not necessarily accessible to everyone. So I think as we continue to work through not just the impacts of COVID on the world of working remotely and distributed, I think more so just the economic impact and the need to create more accessibility is going to force us to think about mobile differently. I think that's really where work is going to go. And I was privy to that insight while I was working for Uber, where we actually had this challenge of working fully on a mobile device for about a month. And I mean, everything from spreadsheets. So like the accounting team was like going through hell trying to think about how to expense fully mobile, and then to writing code. So having like engineering teams be able to push lines on through their mobile devices. And I think that's probably what's coming next. It's that push to mobile. As mobile is becoming more accessible beyond, having laptop access and as Wi-Fi and internet connectivity continues to expand, I think digital work will be a thing for a while. I don't foresee it changing.
Great. Trish, your thoughts on work from home?
Yeah, I think it will continue to change the game as it pertains to work, particularly for those fields that had not explored it to this extent, right? There are certain industries like tech and some others where it was par for the course. But I think many organizations are now seeing that it's totally doable, that the work is getting done. People are able to, some would say, survive, not thrive in the new format, but there definitely is the opportunity to get the work done, and technology allows us to connect in powerful and real ways while different. So I do think that it will continue to transform how we do business of the future and how virtual workforces and workplaces are formed and maintained, even in looking at some businesses that have traditionally worked within sort of office localities, like this is the New York office or this is the DC office, where you're seeing that flattening or seeing teams reformed and reconstituted beyond geographic lines.
Got it. And Elise?
Yes, I mean, I think, moving to the fully remote workforce has certainly been a necessity under COVID. However, there are a lot of companies who are already fully remote prior to COVID. So I think there are certainly a lot of learnings from those companies in how to create a diverse workforce, how to create an inclusive culture, how to recruit, to hire, attract, retain, and develop talent, and also, hit your bottom line every quarter too. So I just think that, certainly there has been a lot of focus on the remote workforce given where we are today. But there's certainly an opportunity to really create think tanks and thought partners within the space to learn how it's done well and areas of opportunity as we move forward.
Got it. And Carol?
Yes. So we're a tech company and we're highly distributed anyway. We have about half of our employees in the US and a little more than half in India. And in the US, we were highly distributed. In India, we were the opposite. It was very contained. There was an office culture. So I do think that things have changed forever, and I think in a very positive way. But what I've learned, if you had asked me 3 months ago what I thought, I would have told you the world is going to be mostly remote and that we would be mostly remote as well. And while I do believe that we will be highly distributed, I have learned that the only way I could think of it is like it's home. There is a tie to home, and there's a brick and mortar home, and it doesn't even matter if anyone works there. But I've noticed that they just want to know there's a home. And I learned this, the way that I've figured this out is we have a lot of people who work, we call them Gainsight everywhere, but remote employees anyway. And they said actually not having any office at all has felt different to them. So even though they were used to working remote, there's something that's like kind of emotionally absent. We are all removed anyway, and it's a strange time, but I do think there might be a need to have some hybrid, but it's definitely changed forever. I don't see the workplace as much about work as it is about creating some sense of community for a company, on some routine basis, maybe not even daily.
Got it. And in addition to work from home, what trends are you seeing for right now? Like, what is your company grappling with, or is there something you're working on where you're kind of doing it differently in terms of either managing people or managing the business? Elise, can we start with you?
Sure. One of the areas that we're putting a lot of emphasis on is people development, manager development, making sure that they have the tools, the resources, the language to be able to have conversations with their direct reports, being able to lead effectively during these times. Also, putting an emphasis on the role that emotional intelligence plays, right, as we're in this new world, if you will. So that's one area. I mean, learning and development, people development is at the top of the list. I would say, second to that is making sure that the environment by which they are working outside of the office is conducive and it's comfortable, right? We really need to ensure that we're leveling the playing field for all employees to feel, safe and connected and productive in their roles. And to be able to lead effectively in doing that. So at Marcus Thomas, we've certainly done a lot around this, making sure that there are, financial stipends for employees to be able to get, a desk or chair or, monitors, whatever they need to be comfortable at home. And I would say the last area that, we're focusing on a lot of things, but I would say that the last area that I'll touch on is around inclusive leadership and culture. So really partnering closely with the affinity groups to ensure that we have a pulse on how the employees are feeling, making sure that they feel supported, and we have the proper programs and experiences to support employees, mental health, right, emotional well-being, and career development as a whole.
Got it. Trish?
Yeah, I echo much of what Elise has stated. I think pretty much many of us are in the same boat. I would say a huge focus on cultural awareness, competency, or curiosity, right? To be intentional about learning more about others' experiences. And that would be in the context of all that's happening in our world and in our nation today. So making sure we're creating those spaces and those opportunities to have courageous conversations, to have difficult discussions, to learn and hear about others' experiences. So we have worked closely as well with our employee groups to do that, to hear how they're processing things like some of the judicial decisions coming down, whether pertain to, say, the grand jury verdict around Breonna Taylor's killing, right? And how does that feel? What are you processing as part of the conversation with our employee networks? Bringing in speakers to speak about what does equity really mean, right? We hear these terms, what does it mean and how does it manifest and what is your role and responsibility as an employee in this community and fostering that. But the other point that Elise mentioned, I really want to piggyback on is the point about helping our employees from a sort of mental wellness standpoint. We work so hard, and oftentimes now we're living at work, not working from home. And so it's constant day in and day out. So how are we making sure that people are taking places and space and time for themselves? So we've created a block of time in everyone's day that you're supposed to take time to, whether it's just breathe or whether it's, take a moment away to read something else, but dedicating that time and giving people that opportunity to use it how they see fit. In addition to that, providing resources, whether it is counseling or other things, making those available to them as they process, again, all this happening from the pandemic to the economic impacts of that to social unrest and continued systemic racism. So being mindful of all the various experiences that individuals are processing differently and helping to create opportunities for them to process that in their own way.
Got it. Josh?
In an effort to decenter myself, I'm just going to go ahead and say that Carol, Elise, and Trish said everything that I think needs to be said. Community, people development, and making sure that there's room, space, psychological safety for the awareness of Black and Brown support in the workplace.
Great. And Carol?
Yeah, I think, a lot of, we've talked about a lot of the things that are relevant for me. I'll just mention two things that I think are interesting. In the beginning of the pandemic, we really focused on leadership development as it related to creating psychological safety. And I am so glad we did that. It really paid off. It was super important. And, the investment we did there has had, really, I think has paid dividends. Now, we also have the added issue with what we're calling, actually, I was just in a conference the other day and they called it election stress disorder. Mm-hmm. And they weren't saying it tongue in cheek because it really is. They said that about 53% of the United States is experiencing extreme stress around the elections. So now we're actually trying to figure out, how do you do that in a way that's considered apolitical, but is also consistent with our values of, we have very strong human rights values. So trying to get all that mixed together into work is something that we're working on right now. And the one other thing that I thought I would just mention is it's not just mental health. It's also the biggest problem we have is that we have parents who are teaching their children at home. And I mean, we haven't come up with a good idea around that one. So I'd be open to hearing. It is a very difficult problem for our parents. And it's a very hard one for us to support as a company because there's not really great answers. But we've had, all I could say is that's something we are really, really struggling with. And that's a big business issue for us.
Got it. Yeah, Carol, the next question is actually for you. And maybe we can talk more about this working parent thing, because I wanted to ask, what are you hearing from your employees in terms of, what they need? And then also, how are you advising your senior leaders and the managers on how to create, a good culture, a strong culture, given all of the stuff that's going on?
So first of all, we've had a very, basically in teammate success, our work changed like every bit that we were working on before COVID kind of went to the side, and we just needed to be front and center and react to wherever we were. And we knew right away we need to be pretty involved with parents because that was where we were hearing the most, there's been that angst right from the beginning. So we've been listening and we've spent a lot of time listening. And what we've learned is that what you need and what you need are very different. So if you have a child who's 4 years old, it's different than if you have a 13-year-old that you're trying to somehow teach at home, God forbid. So what we've learned is that one size really doesn't fit all. So as an example, we do take off 1 day per month. It's like, we call it a wellness day and the whole company takes it off. The value, of course, is that everyone's gone. So there's not you don't feel the pain of being out 1 day as much. but it really doesn't address the day in, day out kind of just slog that parents are dealing with. So what we've done, and I don't know if it's working great, but it's what we're doing, is each of our senior leaders has been responsible for having a kind of a round table with parents, and then we ended up extending it to anybody. And what we talked about is, what are the one or two things we could do, not just as the company, but as a group, as a working group, to make life easier for you. And we've started to adopt some of those things, and it does differ from group to group. And that's what we're doing, because it's so hard to actually find the perfect answer, because they're just different issues for different people. And the way that we're really focusing our energies on senior leaders is to have extreme empathy, which they do. Almost all of them are home with kids. I mean, my kid's 32, so not me, but most of them have kids at home. They're all dealing with the same thing. So they were super empathetic. And I think that's the key, is having a high degree of empathy and being willing to try to work on each person's individual situation with them. And that's, I don't know, it's not rocket science here, but that's all we've come up with.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Josh, a question about business strategy versus HR strategy, right? So you're not specifically in HR, so you're coaching business leaders across the organization. And I'm curious, like, how, like, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are people, focusing on at this point, given that so much of it is people strategy, but there's also, of course, running a business?
Yeah, a lot of what I'm seeing is a child. For example, Alco, we grew from 10 to 70 employees through COVID, through the protesting, through the adjustments to this new world. And what we learned is you have to have every single support program create space for individualized efforts. So Carol, thank you for mentioning that. And I think for executives and business leaders, gone are the days where you can just kind of hide behind your staff in terms of thinking through relationship building, which obviously poses a challenge when you're beyond 100 employees. But the closer you can create feedback loops that are at the individual contributor level, the more you'll understand how to create that psychological safety that allows you to drive hard metrics. I think if you do not have that trust as an executive today, then anything you say related to data, numbers, insights is going to come off as insensitive. And so I think Elise mentioned the importance of emotional intelligence in today's world. If you are a leader that's skated by without the need to think through people problems, this is probably a rude awakening. But in today's world, if you're not people first, then a lot of your outcomes are going to look oppressive, and your drive for outcomes. And I don't use that word lightly, but that's exactly where we are, given that a lot of these problems are out of our control. Some of them are geographic, some of them are access, some of them are just history entrenched in systems that needed to be uprooted. So we're at a place today where the intersections of this work really push business results to the background. And I think the skill and the science, the art is, how do you ensure people are focused on these numbers that drive your business without dehumanizing the company culture? And really what it comes down to is just an extreme version of vulnerability that I think a lot of business leaders have yet to exhibit. The ones that do now will probably have a leg up on how to attract talent, how to grow talent, and how to keep talent as we recover from COVID, and as we create a new relationship with corporate America tomorrow.
Got it. Trish, so question about diversity and inclusion, right? So we're seeing a large number of, postings and openings for chief diversity officers, right? So how is this helping with, some of the problems that we're talking about, the trends that have come up, or just some of the systemic problems? And, can you share maybe like 3 to 5 tips, best practices, right, for dealing with some of the diversity and equity and inclusion issues that we're seeing now?
Right. Thank you for that question. I think we've seen across all industries and sectors that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a business imperative. We've known it in terms of the bottom line, but now people are seeing that their employees are also demanding it more now than ever before, as well as their external stakeholders, their clients, their customers, shareholders, and so forth. And so there is this dual level of shared expectation across your various stakeholder groups now more than ever before that make this work critically important. In terms of some suggestions that I would offer, or some things that are emerging from this, one is that everyone has to take ownership, right, in driving accountability, right, that everyone has to see their role in the work, and that's top down and bottom up. While senior leaders, the CEO and the C-suite must be engaged and involved and must cast a vision, it has to be a shared responsibility. It's my job to drive the work at my firm, but it's everyone's responsibility, right? It's in my job description. It is part of my day-to-day work, but everyone has a role to play in ensuring that we create a diverse workplace and an equitable workplace. And so everyone sharing that ownership and responsibility can not only fall on the HR leaders or the D&I leads, or even just a senior leader, right? They have to set the vision, cast that, but everyone has to share that. 2, there has to be, for accountability, people have to see it as tied to their actual business, their day-to-day responsibility as well, in that they're going to be reviewed, or there'll be metrics, right? KPIs associated with their review. Otherwise, it's a nice to do, not a must do. So as part of that responsibility, it has to be something that will become a part of their review. I think also what I've seen, it's been amazing these last 6 months to see the conversations we're having more now than ever before about race and racism as well, and being unafraid and courageous to have those conversations and to really address the systemic racism that has existed in this country for more than 400 years, because you cannot move from something unless you address the past and where you are. And so how do we move to a place where we have equitable processes and infrastructure and systems if we don't address some of the things that have been historically there for years and years? And so really having those conversations in leadership levels and in those rooms, but also with our workforce, so that we can also learn more from each other. And we talked about this, the point about building community, now at a place where we're isolated and we're quarantined in some instances. How are we creating this virtual community and having people feel a sense of connectedness? So doing that through technology and other means. Training we talked about. And then lastly, I would just say identifying the right partners, right? We cannot do it alone or in a silo. So identifying the right partners that can help you, who have expertise, whether that's external individuals, consultants, or whether that is the right partnership organizations who can help you in advancing your internal goals and your broader community goals. So those would be some things that I would offer in terms of tips that I've picked up, even just 6 months, that have become priority areas of focus for us.
Great. Thanks so much. And Elise, just continuing on the DEI, discussion, just to hear about some maybe points of progress. Like, what are you seeing in terms of things that we hear about are like the pipeline issues, diversity among boards? Do we need things like quotas? Like, where are we just in terms of progress? Like, what are you seeing either at your company or in the work environment overall?
Sure. Before I answer that question, I do want to just touch on briefly the question that you asked previously. I think that it is very, very exciting that we're seeing a lot of Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer roles out there. I remain hopeful that companies and advocates and champions are going to stand by these roles and individuals who are in a position to lead in these roles. However, I do think it's important for companies to position their CDIOs organizationally. I do think it's important to ensure that they have the budget to be able to advance DE&I across the workforce, workplace, marketplace, and community. And I do think it's important to ensure that they have access to experiences, access to relationships, access to, funding and partnerships to be successful so that they stay. I'm fortunate to be at a company that are doing all of these things, but I do see a lot of instances, both inside and outside of the, advertising and technology sector, where the CDIOs are not supported. So I just want to, surface that. It may or may not be the elephant in the room, but I do think that, it's important as we see these roles, on various platforms and are being socialized, that we recognize the role that CDIOs play, and the support that they need to be able to do their best work and bring people along.
You're getting virtual high fives.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, just to leapfrog off of that point that you make, that they need support. Some of the things that I had asked about regarding like the pipeline or specific quotas or, what are the, what's the support that you're talking about? Like, what are the things that are helpful, but maybe are not helpful, but are being thrown about that aren't really helpful? Just if you want to talk about that issue from that angle.
Yeah, I think, I can certainly speak to it from that angle. I mean, as a, Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and People Officer, it's important to ensure you have the support and the advocacy of your CEO, making sure that you have the support from your leadership team and that you're given the space to lead, given the space to explore programs and experiences that are going to, advance DE&I within the workplace. And, the room to grow in your role as well, right? I think when we see these roles and we, put people in these roles, if you will, or if individuals have earned the right to be in the roles, for whatever reason, there's not a lot of room for error. And it's really important to give this particular role the same type of grace and space to lead and to transform a culture. It takes time. Just like any other journey across any other business function, it takes one step toward that journey. And I think, providing the support necessary for a CDIO to be able to transform the organization is critical, as we move forward with this work, because it is work. I think Trish mentioned, like, everyone has a role to play. I was a collegiate student athlete and I use a lot of sports metaphors, and, this is not a sideline sport. This is work. You got to get in the game to, do the work. So whether you're building a recruitment strategy, or, other DE&I strategies that support this work, you really have to be intentional about what you're doing, why you're doing it. And my core philosophy across, DE&I and education is, how can we meet each person where they are in location, learning style, level of experience, to provide that, that whether it's a program or a strategy that really meets the needs of the culture.
Got it.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joshua. Coach, let me in.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm right there with you, Trish. If you want to go first, I can hold my thoughts. I was just going to say, everything Elise is saying points to this finding that most executives probably are aware of, but, may not be as courageous enough or as bold enough to say. But there's no lack of business unit, business function expertise in most of corporate America, tech industry, non-tech industry, any industry. But the emotional literacy and the capacity to practice that self and social awareness in live time to solve some of the people problems that DE&I experts, DE&I executives, belonging executives, right, inclusion strategists are doing in today's world, it's very rare to find in one human being, but also it requires an immense amount of self-support to sustain through all of the challenges that we're living through. And at least to that point, like, one wonderfully well stated. Like we could play that on a loop and just share with everybody because we need it. But a lot of the struggles right now is the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion work is something that's foreign to most business executive teams. And it's hard to measure for people that do not have the lens in this work. And this work doesn't happen by way of just lived experiences. It's a study that takes decades of understanding to do. And we're still undervaluing the work. Even though we're making headway with more roles, more openings, more opportunities, some can argue for more budget, we're still not centering the work. And because it's not centered, a lot of culture and a lot of norms that we experience in the workplace are disenfranchised from the efforts that are being casted out by diversity, equity, and inclusion executives. I speak on that from a place of experience because most recently as the CEO for Alco, we grew from 10 to 70. Of that 56 hires, 7 of them were majority hires, right? And so, there was still a lack of support, even as a Black Hispanic man, for myself in terms of understanding the work that DE&I experts do. So I could have for sure used help from Elise and Trisch and Carol, even thinking about community in that space. And I think it goes beyond just race and race relations, right? You also talk about gender in this conversation, the lack of competence for a lot of men that lead organizations. Knowing firsthand, having to pick myself up after a couple lessons in my hands of being an executive, there's definitely still a lot of lack of awareness around what it is that's necessary to humanize a lot of the workforce, and show up again in the vulnerable ways that we need to in today's world to not just drive results, but create a psychologically safe environment.
Trish, did you want to?
Yeah, I literally feel like we could stay on this for the rest of our session, so I won't take long, I promise you. But I think the point you just mentioned about lack of confidence, it's also even fear that leads to people being sort of paralyzed. And so I do think that's why really what this moment I hope has created, and we'll have to see, you're right, Elise, about how it's sustained. But what this moment has created is the need and necessity for conversation and to address some of these things we try to hide or ignore, right? And so really, really beginning to see, to your point, Joshua, the value. We've actually spoken to post-June, literally, but before I took on this role at Edelman, I led our multicultural client practice. So working with brands and organizations who are trying to reach diverse stakeholders. And the reason why, again, I said we need to do this for ourselves is that many clients were saying, help us talk about DE&I. And the first question was, what are you doing? What do you actually, this is not a communications play. It has to be backed by real action and meaningful plans. And so I think for me, when we talk about, as you stated, Elise, sort of where we are in all of this and where we, how and where we value the work, one, you can't just have a seat at the table. The seat has to have voice, and it has to have voice at the most senior levels. Even when we look at where we place DE&I in our corporate structure, it has to be in the C-suite. It has to be there with the other business leaders because it is a business imperative. And so even just where it's positioned helps people to understand its importance to the day-to-day work of whatever organization, regardless of the industry or sector. And then that comes with then the right size team to do the work, the right resources in terms of money and dollars to be able to make the right investments in L&D and recruitment strategies and programs and so on. So it's all interconnected, but it starts with how you value the work, your understanding of the work, what diversity even means, because it's not just race and ethnicity, right? It is gender, sexual orientation, religion, all those other things that make us uniquely different. But it is then also, when you know what it is, how it's to be, you can then build programs that make a difference and that matter. Sorry, because I said I could stay all day on that. Sorry about that.
No, sure. So the next two questions are actually for everybody. So we can decide who to jump in. Maybe Carol, you want to jump in on this one first, since it's been a while since we've heard from you. So let's talk about pay equity. And I'm thinking about it actually in a couple of ways, because I've seen a survey that women are, have been passed over for promotions. Like men have been promoted and have gotten raises at 3 times the pace of women. So just, some ways to think about this are like, what are you seeing within your own companies? How are you dealing with it? What are you hearing about in the workplace, around pay equity?
So it's such an interesting topic. So first of all, when it comes to pay equity, we've been fairly focused on it for about 2 or 3 years. And I would say no matter how you cut it, where our pay equity is not an issue. However, I will just go ahead and say it's not an issue. There are a couple of little weirdy thingies, but basically not. Where there is a bigger issue, and also we audit promotions. And if we don't see the right balance, we don't move forward until we see the right balance. But what I do see a problem, there's twofold, is one, you could have equity and still not think your salary and compensation is fair. And that is a really interesting discussion to have with people when they're pretty convinced that they're not being paid fairly, and you're pretty sure that they're being paid equally within the company. Like maybe there's a market issue, but it's a really strange thing when there is a concern that what you're saying isn't true. And we have a pretty transparent culture, pretty high trust. Our CEO is actually our biggest advocate for DEI. So we don't, I wouldn't say we have a cultural issue, but we do have a belief issue. And I think it's related to the second thing, which is that while promotions and promotional increases are actually, we're kind of equalizing. And I would say that, we're overperforming there. Where there's a gap, and there's been a gap, is that one jump between individual contributor and first level manager. I think we've heard about this before. And so the equity isn't so much about pay, although it kind of gets expressed that way. It's about the opportunity to go from individual to manager. We don't have a problem when they're going manager to director, director to VP to C-suite. Everything's fine. It's that one place, individual contributor to manager, and we have not equaled things out. And I think that it feels like it's an unfairness, and that unfairness, it just permeates. And that's been really hard to fix. And so anyway, that's my comment on it. Equity is possible to fix. It's actually of the things that you have to fix, it's the easiest because it's objective. You can see X number of years experience doing this job at this pay, and here's the market. It's a math problem. But that doesn't necessarily convince people in their hearts that they're being treated fairly, and it doesn't address the opportunities that are available for people from one level to another.
Got it. Anybody else in terms of ideas?
Would love to jump in there. Carol, I wish for the majority that we had the same problem that you're experiencing, because I agree with you in the sentiment that pay equity should, in theory, be the easiest problem to solve given its level of objectivity. It's
right.
Numbers, right? Years of experience, pay, and again, we have the expertise. It's readily available in the world. If it's not within your company, you can find a consultant that's been doing the work for years and pay them equitably as well to do the work, right? But what I will say is, if you take it one level deeper, and the work I do with executives is try to understand what's the psychology behind their decision making. There is still a lot of emotional fragility that lends to remaining averse to creating the equity in pay, in promotion, in general experience regarding our relationship to the finances. Who gets to access certain budgets? Why are they shaped the way that they are historically or in a projection, right? Like, who is deciding where the funds are being invested and why? Are chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officers involved in deciding and determining budgets, or are they awarded one? Same with HR professionals, which have been often disenfranchised. So looking at like the aggregate, pay equity is remained the issue. And I mean, the numbers aren't unique or foreign to, I believe, anybody in this room, because y'all are major experts in this work. But I believe that disparity, Caroline, to your question, remains because of the fragility and the lack of admittance into what work is valued in what ways. And again, it comes down to being able to be honest and decenter yourself, practice the vulnerability around saying, hey, there are people doing work at a level that exceeds our expectations and they should be rewarded appropriately. But the counter to that, and I think the one actionable insight that I want to make sure everyone walks away with, is there's always this argument around the reverb for the rest of the company. Should someone be paid above and beyond what was promised for doing above and beyond work? Well, hey, if we give this person this bonus or this raise, then everyone's going to expect that. And I think that is probably the weakest argument I've seen in the largest amount of instances, because really what you want to say there is just be transparent with the performance. The person earned the money through the performance. Just be transparent with the results. And should anyone else want that same level of reward, replicate the results. And so most executives will shy away from that answer solely because it decouples or demystifies, right? Like hey, well, everybody's going to want this treatment, right? And so, Carol, again, like, I wish we all had that problem, the one that you have. And I do also agree with what you're pointing out in terms of the jump from individual contributor to manager being a pain point for most companies, because that is a tough one. Because how do you prove people management skills in an objective way? There's probably no interview process that can appropriately assess that, outside of you just being someone that's highly applauded as a great person. But I think, yeah, I do see that pay inequity, and it is stark between male, female, and if we start to get into different categories that make up a diverse workforce, right? There's sexual orientation, and the one conversation I think is often missed, different ability, right? Like employees with different abilities are vastly underpaid because they're often forgotten from this conversation. And then anybody that's at the intersections is often discredited for the work that they're doing, moving through the emotional barriers above and beyond from individual contributor to executive.
Right. Trish, Elise, anything before we move on to, another issue?
One quick thought is for companies to invest in data tools to aggregate the disparity in compensation, to aggregate the various issues around DE&I. I think oftentimes HR functions as a whole are using many different quote unquote data sets, data tools, platforms, and the data is fragmented. And oftentimes it takes way too long to get the answers or the results that you need to be able to move the conversation along, to be able to create a business case, quote unquote, for pay parity. So just keeping in mind the role that data plays to advance this work is really important. And I'll leave it at that. I can go on for rounds. But
yeah, great.
Just to make sure that they have access, right? Like access to the budget and the tools, the same way that, any other department, whether it's finance or marketing, or, just invest in the, invest in the tools that are necessary to be able to.
Share one thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and then be transparent about the analysis and the findings.
Yes.
Right. So if you're doing the gender pay analysis, if you're doing the racial pay analysis, which we do at Edelman, then share what the findings are, and then hold yourselves accountable on how you're going to address the gap.
Yes.
Bridge that divide.
Yeah.
So one thing I just wanted to mention, I just want to throw this out because it's kind of interesting. I have found a bigger problem, not as much in internal equity as bias in the way that we value jobs. So that, for example, typically female, or that their jobs. I'm going to use HR for a second. HR people are always paid the least in the C-suite. If you look at the market data, why is that? I don't know. Could it have anything to do with the fact that most of the people who are in that field are female? Why is it that, there are other roles that have equal impact on the company that are primarily male, seem to have a different market value? So I think that's another thing that's super important to look at, is especially in gender, because you can see it. So it's so easy to see, not easy, but it's more obvious that there are certain things that are traditionally considered female, others that are traditionally considered male, and oh, what a surprise, they seem to be valued differently in the market. I think that is the most interesting area of study to me, that someday if I were rich and I could just sit around and study all day, that would be the study.
Great. So if we shift gears a little bit and talk about advice to individuals, about managing their careers. So we can talk about the pay equity piece, or really about promotions. Like if you were talking to someone who is 25 years old and who ultimately aspires to reach a C-level role, like what would you advise them in terms of what to focus on now, either specifically skill-wise or just how to manage their career? And again, this is for everybody. So whoever wants to kind of jump in, take that.
Take on every
Trish, you might be cutting out.
Yeah,
Am I
you're
right?
breaking up for me a little bit.
opportunity that you can, to be quite honest, right? This is a time to unstable connection. Is that any better?
Yeah, Trish, you're breaking up a little bit. Do you want to try to turn off your video or reset or something?
I'll let
I'm not hearing you, Trish. Can anybody else hear? Or
Oh, you're breaking up, Trish. Can you put it in the chat? I want to hear it.
yeah, and in the meantime,
Yeah,
let's see if we can.
I think that meant just a second. Why? That's the way
Oh,
I read
okay.
it. Like, just a second, I'll be right there.
Okay.
Does anyone want to take that while she's resetting? Because I think she's going to hop off and hop on.
I'll add in saying 25-year-olds looking to make a name for themselves in the industry or advance or navigate throughout their career, focus on skills, hard skills, and skills in the realm of emotional intelligence, because those can't be taken away from you. And the one thing to expect in life in general, not just in career, is constant change. And I feel every professional has just been leveled recently with the change and the change and adjustments brought on by COVID. So for any young professional looking to really invest in themselves, focus on hard skills. And hard skills don't mean learning the code or any sort of technical skills, but if you're in accounting, focus on accounting. If you're in finance, focus on being able to up the literacy of your organization. If it's HR, make sure you understand program management, design and development, implementation, software rollouts, which don't necessarily mean you need to write code, but actually can bring a team together under a new cadence for work, a new rhythm for organizing and communicating. Focus on a hard skill that's measurable, that allows you to think through how to demonstrate an impact. And then focus on those skills that are people-oriented, that allow you to communicate your ideas, communicate your thought process, connect with other people, people different from yourself, and allow you to have the confidence to execute. So focus there, and that can't be taken away from you. But your title will change, the company you work for will change, your teammates will change, your pay will change, everything will change. Your skills, they're yours forever.
Got it. Trish, I see you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Let me tell you, it was so poetic what I shared as well. It was just mind blowing. I'm not sure what Joshua may have shared, so I don't want to be repetitive. But what I was going to say is that at 25, it's really taking on every opportunity that you can to learn as much as possible, to immerse yourself in your industry, to not say no to even the tough assignments or the assignments that seem somewhat impossible. I think I've learned the most from those than any others. So embracing that experience and really understanding that we no longer work in a sort of a corporate ladder. There's no corporate ladder anymore. It's more like a jungle gym, right? And so there are lateral moves you'll make, there are moves you'll make just to learn more skills so that you can then take that next step up or wherever. So I think even understanding that in your mind gives you a different perspective as you then navigate your career journey. And then finally, of course, getting good mentors, identifying those within your organization and your industry and beyond who can help you as you chart the course.
Got it. And I mean, Elise, Carol, feel free to jump in, but I wanted to ask a part B to this question, unless you have something. So the part B is, okay, so that's for a 25-year-old who's kind of has, maybe 30 years to go with their career. What if I fast forward that a little bit, kind of to middle management? So you're 35 at this point, you're in the middle, which I think is actually the trickiest part of career management, actually. And so advice for the 35-year-old who's looking to break from middle management to executive, and maybe sharing, what you did to go from, maybe someone on, let's say, the DEI team to running it, or someone in the HR team to running it. Like, what is that? Yeah.
I'm happy to, I'm happy, to jump in a little bit. I just laughed when you said 35. I'm just going to leave it at that, because I'm a lot older than that. It just irritates me to hear mid-careers 35, and I think, oh my God, I'm so late. But anyway, the one thing I would say is don't be afraid to change jobs. That is one thing that I think can accelerate. It's probably not popular to say, but the one thing that can accelerate your career quickly is if you do not think you're getting what you need at the company that you're at, don't be afraid to move. Don't move lateral necessarily. Always try and, when you're at that point in your career, when you're 25, it's the jungle gym for darn sure. But when you get to your mid-career, I think you've got to start using that time to move up. And the problem is that if the company doesn't have that opportunity for you, then don't stay. That would be my advice.
Yeah, great. Elise?
Yeah, I would only add, well, I mean, there are a couple of things, like know your why, discover your strengths, unpack your weaknesses. And it doesn't mean that you have to double down on your weaknesses, right? It just means that you are aware of what they are, you're aware of your blind spots. And then this way you can be more, prescriptive on the team that you want to build that will fill those gaps. Another area is, staying curious and a lifelong learner of whatever business you're going into. I think it's easy to kind of sit back and coast when you're at a certain point of your career. You think you know what you know. But when you're in the middle of your career, it's important to, stay abreast of what's happening within the industry, who the key players are, who the influencers are, and continue to build your network. I think Trish, you mentioned earlier about the role that mentors play, right? And having those, those thought partners and those trusted advisors throughout your career, and not getting to a point in whether it's personal development or professional development, where you sit back and wait. You have to still go out and, make the effort. And I think the times that we're in now is a perfect, opportunity and environment to, kind of get outside of your comfort zone, meet new people. I think this is one of the most vulnerable experiences that we've all had. We're in each other's homes and, offices. We see kids go, fly by, dogs barking, partners like running behind you. It's just, we're all in this together. And, I think as a professional within the diversity and inclusion space, it's brought us all together, I think, in a way that I haven't experienced in my professional career. So I just think as whether you're looking for a new role, or, identifying new opportunities within your organization, really coming back to, knowing your why, and also identifying your transferable skills that carry over from your current industry or your current role into new roles, and being able to articulate it in a compelling way, so that you can, get the role, or, get the role within your company or outside of your company.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue, because the next question was specifically for the job seeker, right? So let's say that you are in transition right now, and we're talking about networking in a pandemic. So that's obviously different. Interviewing when it's video interviewing now, not live. Companies' budgets are pretty tight right now. I mean, there are a lot of things that make this market, I think, pretty challenging for the job seeker. So and again, anyone can answer this question, like, what advice do you have? And just thinking about your own recent hiring experiences, like, what made people stand out, that might be able to help a job seeker today?
I'll add something in short. A lot of people think of the job search as a problem to be solved. And the paradigm shift I try to offer everybody I coach on the job search is to think about being a problem solver. Instead of thinking of yourself and your job search as a problem to be solved, think of being a problem solver. Most institutions, organizations, teams, we want to work with problem solvers. Last thing you want is somebody that's coming in with all of their problems talking about help me. And most people think of their job search in that way. And the moment you can see the other side, where you're bringing yourself to an organization to add value, meaning you are going to solve a problem for them, then your interview just completely spins on its head, because you're collaborative, you're solutions oriented, you're looking to bring something, not take something.
Great. Trish, Carol, Elise, anything to add?
Well, there's, again, so first choice for someone that's job seeking might be to be an actual employee. But I would like to just share that sometimes companies have more limitation on headcount than they do on money. And one option is to see how you can provide the help as a contractor, consultant, or in non-traditional ways, versus limiting yourself to being an employee. Understanding that that's not true for every role. So I don't want it to be the, it's not a panacea, but I know I've had the experience myself, and I have it right now. I have a little extra money in my budget, but no way is that money going to go to a hire. But I have problems to solve. I might be more willing to hire someone to do it part-time as a consultant than I would, for example, to make a hire.
Yeah, great point. And given that this is, so just to wrap things up, this is the Future of Work panel, right? And so we started by talking about trends and just famous last words for everybody. I'd love to hear from everybody, just in terms of, like, where do you see us going from here? Any last pieces of advice that maybe you didn't get to share, or a question you wanted me to ask that I didn't ask? I'd love to hear from everybody, like, what their key takeaways are for this audience, right? That's come to listen to the Future of Work.
I would just say, I think the future of the workforce is ours, right, to create. And I think that we own that. We have that opportunity, that privilege, and that responsibility to help to create organizations that are places that we enjoy working while our business, successful in business, right? That are inclusive and allow people to bring all of who they are, and doing that in a way where we can respect, appreciate, and celebrate one another. And so working, I think the workforce of the future is for us to determine. And just to piggyback on the last question, I think, and as you're looking for opportunities in the workforce of the future, to be open to that, just new opportunities, that it may not be in the same space you would have traditionally looked, and it might look different. It might have a different title in terms of the job description or how it's defined, but being open to that, and that we can really chart the course for what it looks like.
Great.
I'll chime in. The one word that I would use to characterize where we are today is uncertainty. And let's face it, that's not easy for anybody. So even though it's uncertain, and even though all of us are sort of, well, I can't speak for everybody. I personally am, I'm a little depressed. I feel it. But I would say for John, be brave. That is actually the advice I'd give to anybody right now. It's hard. Everybody is suffering, and if you can sort of just forge on and be brave, I think we're going to really create something worthwhile.
Great.
I have younger siblings being trained on. Ooh.
Go.
Go ahead, Josh.
I have younger siblings being trained on Zoom. I mean, as young as like 6 years old, and they know how to mute and unmute. So learning how to present and facilitate on Zoom, huge, and mobile. The world is going to move towards mobile. And the more we can get comfortable with writing slide decks on your cell phone, because I know we send emails on them, the more we can push the envelope on what we do on our cell phones, the more we're going to be able to step into a future that's fully remote, distributed, digital, and there to support an infrastructure that we can't really touch, right?
Great. Elise?
I think, one of the things that it's really important, especially during these, uncertain and unprecedented times, is compassion. I think we have to give ourselves and each other the grace and space to do our best work in this environment. And it doesn't mean that we still can't push ourselves and push others to achieve greatness. I think there is a certain level of compassion that needs to be, displayed within our organizations and within, and outside of our organizations, to ensure that we can continue to do our best work and encourage others to do their best work.
Well, I think that's such a great way to end it, right? I mean, so we've heard in terms of future trends that the future is ours to create. So thank you, Trish, for that. And Carol, to be brave in times of uncertainty. Josh, I love the practical. Learn mobile and video. The 6-year-olds are coming for you. The 6-year-olds are coming. I love that. And then, of course, at least be compassionate, which we all need with the election stress and the social justice stress and all of that. I think this is a great way to end the panel. I'll only add that, I get a lot of questions because I talk in the media a lot about what's the future trend? What's this? What's this? What's that? And, at the end of the day, your career is binary. It's 0 or 100. Unemployment, you're not 33% unemployed or 8% unemployed. You're either you have a job or you don't. You love your job or you don't. So don't worry so much about trends, statistics, all of that. Focus on yourself, but also have compassion and all of that other stuff that we talked about today. So thank you so much, Carol, Josh, Trish, Elise. I think we ended right on time for the next panel.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much. That was an absolutely amazing panel and a really fitting way to finish what's been an incredibly inspiring day. We covered so much in this panel, from talking about, it's so refreshing to see leaders in industry talking about empathy, being mindful, awareness, and sort of widening the scope of how we think, of what we interact with, so that we can be more conscious in the workplace. Elise, it was fantastic, talking about giving people the space to grow and not seeing diversity and inclusion as an event, but also rather as an evolution that continues day to day. And Trisch as well, talking about accountability and the importance of real action from the top down to the bottom. And I really enjoyed as well Carol speaking about talking to people and meeting them where they are, emotionally, educationally, and that's a perfect segue into kind of ending with what Joshua was saying there about emotional intelligence. So just so inspiring. Thank you so much. We are going to finish the SVC Conference 2020. We're going to wrap that up. Thank you very much, Caroline. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Do take action on what you've heard. Please go to the website, www.strategicvisionconference.com, and contact SVC. We'd love to know more about the new businesses that you started as a result of participating in the conference, and to hear about and to be part of your story as you go forward. With that, feel free to add me, Dash Barber. You can find me on LinkedIn. And lastly, there is a link to the blockchain, to Alex Mashinsky's company, Celsius. If you're interested in using the code, go to the SVC website and you'll find it there. Well, that's it. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, and good luck in these uncertain times. We all look forward to connecting with you soon.